Alexandra is out there somewhere, and no pressure, Bo, but apparently people don't want a damn squib, so you have to come here and absolutely shine. As many of you know, the Book Cafe is an absolutely great place for music. It's the go-to place on a Friday night and a Saturday night and a Thursday night and a Monday night even. There's always something happening at the Book Cafe. The music here is absolutely wonderful. And I've been working with the Book Cafe team to try and give the literary events the kind of excitement and edge that the music events have. And I'm very, very pleased to see all of you come out for what we hope will be the first of a series of conversations with interesting writers, thinkers, thought leaders. And we're very, very thrilled today to have with us our first guinea pig, Alexandra Fuller. Her list of accomplishments, I'm telling you, is longer than the Prime Minister's list of ex-girlfriends. So I'm not even going to try and list everything that she's done. And because here at the Book Cafe we are an equal opportunity insulter, I should also say it's as long as Jonathan Moyo's sentences about the Prime Minister's girlfriends. We're very, very pleased to have you here with us, Alexandra, and I would like to ask you, please, to join me in giving a big, fat, rousing Book Cafe welcome to Alexandra Fuller.
On.
Are we high enough for you, do you think? Are we high enough, do you think?
You're fairly high. Thanks. Okay, let the attack begin.
I mean, I think everybody saw us greet each other ecstatically. That wasn't acting. I actually haven't seen this woman for, gosh, 5 months? The last time we saw each other was at Franschhoek,
yeah.
where you were talking about your new book, Cocktail Hour Under the Tree of Forgetfulness. Can you all hear us? Sound engineer? Should I do that? Testing, 1, 2, testing. 1, 2, testing. Is that better? Okay. You were talking about your latest book, Cocktail Hour Under the Tree of Forgetfulness. But I just want to take you a little bit first, take you back to your very first book. And remember that not everybody here will have read all your books, so no spoilers, right? But maybe if you could tell us about this first book, which is my favorite Alexandra Fuller book, Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is about, how you came to write it, and why you came to write it?
Well, my mother... Am I yelling? You good? You can hear me. Considered that God had given her a pair of ovaries for one reason only, and that was to produce a writer. So when she was pregnant with my sister, she read, who's 3 years older than I am, she read Vanessa the entire works of Shakespeare in the womb, in the hope that this would garner a literary genius, and it had the opposite effect. My sister is functionally illiterate. And so then my mother, to the point that Vanessa even... even her vocabulary's dodgy, so she'll grope towards a word that she wants, but she won't quite nail it. So I was always confused growing up because she confused hitchhikers and hijackers. And a couple of years ago, my dad turned 70 and he said, right, that's it, I'm going to die. I've done my 10 and now I'm going to snuff it. I'm not going to bat some other chap's innings. So, we were at home, my sister and my mum and dad and I. My dad goes and chooses the tree he wants to be buried under, and it's very sad. And then we had to coax my parents back from this grave site because now my mother chooses a tree 25 feet away from my father, and he thinks, no, the dogs will dig him up because her dogs will be...
Wouldn't they be buried fairly deeply?
Yeah, no hope. And so we coax them back to have a drink, and... then we get maudlin, and Vanessa goes, I can't stand it. When Dad dies, you're going to have to do the urology. So having failed with my sister, my mother fixed her not inconsiderable literary ambitions on me, and she was really hoping that, and she went on. I don't know if people here remember the days during the liberation struggle, they would send out, those of us who lived in the rural areas, correspondence packets. And my mother would just throw the mathematics over her shoulder. Darling, you can always pay someone to count for you. But what are you going to write about? And then she went on to live this gloriously biographically worthy life. And so I got to school, I couldn't count, so I had to write. Yeah. And I wrote 10 wildly unsuccessful novels.
10?
10.
How long were they? Are we talking 500-word novels here?
No. We're talking the full 300 pages. And my agent actually finally fired me. I was living in the States by then. And she said, you've got some talent, but I don't think you've got a story.
Excuse me, for those who might not know the world of publishing, it's extremely unusual for an agent to fire a writer. So you must have been excruciatingly bad.
Very bad. And my then husband went to go and climb active volcanoes in Mexico rather than spend another moment with a suicidal writer. But on his computer, he left an envelope that said, only to be opened in the event of my death, because he went off to Mexico to climb active volcanoes. So I did wait till he got to the end of the driveway. And then I ripped the thing open, and it was the most boring letter. It was blah, blah, blah insurance and yabba, yabba, yabba mortgage.
And did he mention the tree under which he wanted to be buried?
No, actually, no. I think he thought that would be a bit provoking. Didn't want to give me any ideas. But he did say at the end of the letter, look, I think you should just write the truth, if only for yourself. Because really in the States, when I get introduced to people, they say, well, what part of South Africa are you from? Or what's Australia like? And there's this sort of huge gap of intelligence around Zimbabwe. And so I really wrote the book for my children.
You wrote it for your children. When you're writing a memoir, it must be extraordinarily difficult because, on the one hand, it's your story, but it's also other people's stories. How did your family react?
Not well. My mother organized boycotts and sanctions against me north of the Limpopo and south of the equator. And she said, George W. was in power at the time, so my mother took a leaf from his book and said, you're either for me or against me. So anyone who read the book was against my mother. So that was it. That counted out the whole family. And my sister said, well, I can't read it because I'm functionally illiterate. So that gets me out of trouble. And so when my father saw that worked for her, he said, well, I can't read it either. I'm also illiterate. So then the book came out on audio tape, and I gave it to my sister, and she listened to it, and she said, actually, you make us sound kind of normal. This is great. I don't know what Mum's bother was about. So I was encouraged by her response, and I said to my father, well, now you can listen to the book on audio, on a tape. And he said, no, I can't. I'm deaf. It says so in your book, right in the middle of page 25.
Actually, it does. No, but on a more serious note, Alexandra, I mean, this is I think, one of the biggest dilemmas that writers of what we would call creative nonfiction, particularly this form of writing the memoir, have to grapple with. At what point does your story begin and the other person's take off? I can tell you that as a black Karanga woman, a proud daughter of the Karanga people, we have so many family secrets. I could, dig out, I could write 10 memoirs about my family. But I would feel incredible. I would feel like I was exposing them. I would feel like I was betraying them in some way. And I know that my parents would be extremely unhappy if I were to write certain things about, my family or family members. Did that bother you at all when you were writing this book?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wasn't expecting to get published. So then there was that awkward phone call home. And then I think, really, to be a true writer, truly to write anything worth reading, you have to court eviction from your own tribe. And if you don't do that, then, because you really do have to write what you know best. Otherwise, I think there's a kind of, I think we even know it. You pick up a memoir, it's all very nice, but there's a sense there that there's a truth missing. And
those silences, yeah.
Yeah, and the silences are blaring because, after all, we're all, we're all human and we understand human foibles. And when it was coming across as fiction, the truth, in a way, celebrated how complicated people are, and which is what I love about nonfiction, because people can be compassionate and racist and creative and alcoholic and wonderful mothers and neglectful and genius, all those things, and that all in one book. I mean, ultimately, it was a love story. I think the closer I get to home, the harder I have selling it as a love story.
Right.
I have a much easier time in the south of the United States of America.
No, but let me push you again on this, because you mentioned fiction. Because one vehicle you could have used is to fictionalize your own story. Writers do it all the time. I'm certainly going to do it.
No one would have believed it.
But it's fiction.
But I mean, when I was writing this last book, The Cocktail Hour Under the Tree of Forgetfulness, which was really my mother's story, because afterwards she made the very good point. She said, after I wrote Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight, you don't know who I am. I didn't appear when you were born. I didn't stop being a person when you left home at 18. You never asked me who I am. And I thought, that's a very good point. So I sat down and interviewed her in Scotland, because I wanted to go to a country where it's illegal to have guns and ammunition in the house. And I adore my mother, and I'm a lot like her. When I was really talking to her, and really hearing her story about being here, it's a longer answer really in a lot of ways. I did this hours and hours and hours of interview with her, but what I mostly remember about the interviews is how cross she was with me. She kept saying, well, actually her biggest excuse that I'd written Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight was that I'd become an American citizen. And she said, those bloody Americans, they love to write books about how they weren't kissed enough as children. And then they go on that Oprah Jerry show, and then they cry a lot. And everyone hugs them. And when that didn't work, because everyone's, and then she said, well, you were switched at birth. And I looked just like her. So that... Which makes it sound like my mother doesn't like the United States. She loves it. She came out to visit me with my illiterate sister. And I don't know how many of you have flown out there, but you have to fill in this form that says, are you now, or have you ever been a Nazi? Are you now, have you ever been a communist? Are you carrying drugs? Do you have $1 million? Are you going to blow up the country? Do you have some contagious disease? And Vanessa, just wrote yes.
To everything.
So when they got to Newark, my mum said it was fantastic. That border patrol swept down on your sister, and he had to waddle because he had a gun strapped to every limb, and he carted her off to this little room, and I could just see her in this little slither of glass. It was wonderful. It was just your sister and 1,000 weeping Mexicans. But in a way, Cocktail Hour Under the Tree of Forgetfulness, I wanted to redress the balance. Who are you really?
Yeah.
And I think that's a question as writers we ask ourselves all the time. Who are you really? Why are you here? And what are you for? Yeah. And by the time it came, my mother lost 3 children.
Yes.
And by the time it came to the third loss, I phoned up a friend of mine who is a fiction writer, and I said, if this was fiction, 2's plenty. 1's enough. And I think that's the power of nonfiction.
Because, of course, if it's fiction, your editor could edit out the other losses. Exactly. But this is the truth.
Exactly. You've made the point. You've made the point.
Yeah.
There's loss.
Yeah.
You don't need more and more piled on more. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the racial politics of dogs. Because I have to say, what you said about your mother, Nicola Fuller, she comes across as a fully realized person. There's that scene where she's singing in that bar, and she's absolutely fantastic. And you really feel her pain when she has a miscarriage. You feel her loss. But at the same time, there are these moments when I, as a black reader, had to gasp and cringe. One of the sentences that still stays with me, years after I read your book, is when she says that the loss of the war, losing the war, caused her serious mental depression. And because, of course, we celebrate winning the war. And so for me, as a black reader, it was a total shock to learn that there might actually be people, very interesting, complex, even likable people, who actually don't celebrate.
God, I love being home. I never get this question. In the States, they're too cringy about their own racial politics. You know, for me, look, I think that there was a way in which our war never got resolved. I mean, I think that's almost undisputable. That by 1981, we were all just supposed to get on with it. And I think that, you know, my mother really hoped that I would grow up and write Out of Africa or, you know, The Flame Trees of Thika or something like that. But I said it was for us a lot more complicated than that. There was, how do you sustain, you know, a racist regime unless you have supporters of that? And what's awkward about that is that, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm sort of post-independence, really. My thinking and the soul of myself really happened post-independence. But I was made under the Rhodesian regime. Yeah. And to pretend that that didn't happen, or that there was a kind of... am I allowed to curse at the book cafe, or will the...
We invite cursing in all its forms at the book cafe.
You know, I mean, there was that saying that, you know, to be a white Rhodesian was a bit like being a mushroom. They bury you in horse shit and keep you in the dark. And I think that that was a very real event for those of us who lived under that. Now, to pretend that that didn't happen, I think would have made it a half-truth. And anyway, any story, if it's going to be good, needs to be universal. And I cannot stop reflecting on the power hunger of the United States. That a quarter of the world's population, or fifth of the world's population, whatever it is, feels entitled to the resources of an entire world. That they will go and bomb and destroy anyone they disagree with. And yet they are so narrow-minded and so self-celebratory and so frighteningly patriotic. And so for me, it's always a reflection. It's not just our story.
No, what I love about dogs is that it really does show that you can actually dismiss an entire group of people with a label, racist, etc., etc. But what you don't get when you do that is to see the full complexity of the individual. Right, and to me, it was a beautiful, beautiful lesson to read this, because I am actually now writing a novel in which one of the main characters is a white ex-Rhodesian, I guess you could call him. He's dead in the first sentence because it's easier to write about a dead white man than one who's actually alive. But to me, it was really, really important to understand that even with the difficulty of our racial politics, people still remain highly complex, highly individualized persons. But I don't know if that lesson has gone the other way, right? The black characters in Dogs, for instance, they're not that individualized. I mean, I remember July.
And I think that, I mean, for me, that was a very conscious decision, because I think that when we were growing up, the black people in our lives weren't individualized. Otherwise, that would have been really mind-blowing, and we would have...
You're humanizing them.
Yeah, now we're humanizing them. And so for me, then, to go and humanize people in a book who weren't humanized in life felt like a fundamental lie. I don't think that was all the experience of all white Rhodesians, but it was certainly my experience.
And you know, this reminds me of Doris Lessing. The Grass is Singing is one of my absolutely favorite novels by any writer of any nationality of all time. And I can totally understand reading this and reading other books, Mukiwa and so on. I can totally understand the context in which that book exploded, because it absolutely did explode. Imagine a white farmer's wife, storekeeper, I think she was, lusting after one of her black servants. That must have been one of the most transgressive novels ever, I think, to come out of Rhodesia. So you're absolutely right. I think when you humanize and you individualize somebody that you are meant to be giving second-class status, then you have to confront that person's humanity.
And that's why nonfiction was so important to me, because of course I love my mother, and I love both my parents, but you know, it was a complicated situation to come out of, because you know, I didn't share her politics once I grew up. I went on to write a book years later about an oil field worker. I live in Wyoming in the US, and Dick Cheney is my neighbor. Yeah, that's nice. And I went on to write a book about an oil worker. Wyoming has the highest death rate in the nation amongst oil workers. You get fined more for killing a moose out of season in Wyoming than you do for killing an oil worker. And so I thought, well, that's injustice. And what's nice about coming from this part of the world is that everyone else is going, no, it's not injustice, it's just the way it is. And I went, hey, I'm from Southern Africa, man. I know what injustice is. Guys can't trick me and pretend it's just the smell of the drains. And so I wrote this whole book, and then I ended up being this sort of accidental activist, and the oil corporations were harassing me. And
you're talking, of course, about the Legend of Colton H. Bryant. Yeah.
And sort of saying things like, who's paying you? And I said, no one. And then they were confused, because how are they going to find, what's the worst they could do? Take away my pencil? And anyway, I organized a peace ride. I went out to the Bureau of Land Management, which is the federal agency that oversees this vast overtaking of gorgeous, fragile, pristine, wild land in the middle of Wyoming. And I said, can I do a peace march out onto the oil patch? And he sort of looked a bit baffled. And he said, I said, can I drive my car out there anyway? No, you can't drive your vehicle out there because the oil companies have leased that land. And I said, well, can I walk out there? No, and you can't ride a bike. And anyway, as I was leaving, he made two mistakes. He called me little lady. And then he said, well, little lady, this is Wyoming, and no one can stop you from riding your horse out here. So my parents happened to be staying with me. I got all my cowboy friends together, and we organized a peace protest to go and ride out onto this oil patch and demonstrate the speed at which we thought the West should be developed at. Right. So now I've got to explain this to my parents, who are terrified I'm a communist anyway. So I can't say we're going for a peace march ride. So I said, we're going for a nice hack with some cowboys. And we get to the Bureau of Land Management parking lot in Pinedale, Wyoming. And there's a big unit. I had to get clearance from the police and everyone else. And there's a huge cop unit, lights flashing, and guy gets out, he's got a bulletproof vest. He's also got to waddle, gun every orifice. My mother's eyes light
Orifice?
up. Yeah, I'm sure.
So we've gone past the limbs to the orifices now. Okay.
And my mother's eyes light up. She makes a beeline for the cop. She loves a man in uniform. So I get her onto a difficult horse as quickly as I can. Try and keep her occupied. My father goes up to him and he goes, do you know, I'm dreadfully, this is my father, dreadfully sorry. We've been trying to shut her up for 40 years as well. Let's see what ammunition you've got. I would have thought a taser would just about do it. A fairly good shot in the left buttock, wouldn't you say? And this cop came up to me and he goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry for you. No wonder you turned out to be such a raving pinko communist.